Hello everyone. Welcome to the lecture series on Introduction to Indian Philosophy. I have with me Manisha Sharma, who is going to interpret my lecture in sign language. Okay, so in the last lecture I discussed with you the first three padarthas, Dravya, Guna and Karma. There are four more padarthas which we need to discuss. They are Samanya or universal, Vaiśeṣika or particular, Samavaya or inherence, and Abhava or absence. In fact, these four padarthas are of great importance as well as of interest to those who grapple with questions pertaining to realism, nominalism, and conceptualism. Realism, as you must know, is the view that material objects as well as general or abstract ideas, which we call universals, exist in the world. For example, not just humans, but humanness is a reality. It exists in the world as humans do. Nominalism, as opposed to realism, is the doctrine according to which general ideas or universals do not correspond to anything real in the world. Universals are nothing but names. Reality consists only of particular things. So, humanness is a mere name. It does not correspond to reality. Only particular humans are real. And conceptualism is a theory which is somewhere between realism and nominalism, because it maintains that universals are found in the particulars, which means humanness is in the particular humans, and that universals do not have an independent reality over and above the particulars. Actually, there is a divide among philosophers with regard to these, as is evident from what these theories are about and what they mean. In classical Indian philosophy, we can say that a strong realist position is championed by the Nyaya, Vaiśeṣika and Mimamsa schools. The supporters of nominalism are the Buddhist schools, and conceptualist view is endorsed by the Vedantins and the Jainas. Now the seventh padartha, which is Abhav, is also interesting because it is about negative entities. It is about absences. I wish to take a pause here and discuss a bit of history of these padarthas listed in the Vaiśeṣika system. So, as I mentioned in my first lecture on the Vaiśeṣika system, that Sage Kanada, the founder of the Vaiśeṣika system, talked about only 6 padarthas, as is evident from the 4th sutra of the first ahanik of the first adhyaya. And the sutra is Dharma Vishesh Prasutat Dravya Guna Karma Samanya Vishesh Samavayanam Padarthanam Sadharmya Vaidharmyabhyam Tattva Jnana Nishreyasam, which may be translated as the supreme good is achieved through the knowledge of reality resulting from a special merit arrived at through the inductive method of agreement and difference of properties of the 6 categories, namely substance, quality, action, universality, particularity, and inherence. However, this numbering kept changing with time. According to Chandramati, who wrote Dash Padartha Shastra, the number of padarthas is 10. Apart from these 7, he mentions potentiality, non-potentiality, and commonness as categories or concepts of intelligibility. Potentiality is the power to give rise to an effect, and it is found in substance, quality and action. Non-potentiality, as the name suggests, is the opposite of potentiality. So, it is the inability to produce an effect. For example, an apple seed does not have the power to produce a mango. Then, the 10th, which is commonness, is the relation between genera and species. For example, substanceness is the genus and potness is the species. You may wonder, this sounds exactly like the category of universal, and that is true, which is probably why commonness was merged with universal. Eventually, all these three were given up by the system and only 7, including abhav or negation, were considered as the final padarthas. So, these 7 padarthas are classified either as being, bhav or non-being, abhav. The first 6 come under being, whereas the last, which is absence or negation, is non-being. Now here, the term being has more to do with positive. I'll tell you why. Actually, being is found in the first 3 padarthas only. That is, in dravya, in guna and karma. It is not found in samanya, vaiśeṣika and samavaya. Now, if being is not found in these 3, are these to be considered under non-being? Of course not, for they are not non-being either. Why? Because they belong to the first 3. Samanya belongs to dravya, it belongs to guna, it also belongs to karma. Likewise for vaiśeṣika and samavaya, they too belong to dravya, guna and karma. They cannot belong to non-being or absences. That is why they are called positives. The first 3, that is dravya, guna and karma, are objects of knowledge and they are not thought dependent, whereas samanya, vaiśeṣika and samavaya are relative to thought. In fact, abhav is also relative to thought, but unlike samanya, vaiśeṣika and samavaya, abhav is negative. Anyway, we'll discuss about that later. Let me now begin with samanya. As I mentioned before, according to Kanada, universals are buddhyapeksha or relative to thought. But this does not mean that the universals are mere subjective concepts in our minds. They are objective realities. The Vaiśeṣikas define samanya as nityam ekam anekanugatam samanyam, meaning samanya is eternal, one and residing in many. Now, because universals are eternal and residing in many particulars, it is evident that their ontological status is not just different but also independent of that of the particulars themselves. There is an identical potness in all the pots, an identical humanness in all humans, an identical cowness in all cows. Interestingly, the ontological status of universals does not change with the origin and destruction of the particulars to which they may be related. It is also important to understand how universals are related to particulars, but that I will discuss a little later. So, you can see how robust kind of realism is advocated in the Vaiśeṣika system. I hope the distinction between nominalism, realism and conceptualism is also clear to you now. And this reminds me of something interesting. Actually, Sage Kanada in the Vaiśeṣika Sutras states that Samanya can be viewed as a Vaiśesha. He says this because he considered Samanya and Vaiśesha as genus and species respectively. So, cowness is both Samanya as well as Vaiśesha. It is a genus with respect to particular cows but it is a species with respect to the more inclusive genus animalness. However, with the passage of time and modifications by later Vaiśeṣikas, this translation is not in use anymore. And if we have to define Samanya in a comprehensive manner, then we can say that universals or Samanya are real, independent, timeless, ubiquitous entities which inhere in individual substances, qualities and actions, and are repeatable in the sense that they may inhere in several distinct individuals at once or at different times and places. One must keep in mind that arbitrary use of the suffix ness, as in cowness-ness, cowness-ness-ness, is not allowed. Universals cannot be created by just adding the suffix ness. And here comes the distinction between real and conceptual or upadhis. But I'm not going into it. So let us understand the 6 conditions laid down by the Vaiśeṣikas to identify the real universals. The first condition is that the universal must exist in a plurality of individuals. This is understandable. Why? Because this is what the definition says. But why is this condition so forcefully expressed? There is a reason. Take the cases of space and time. We all know that there is only one space, there is only one time. So, there is no spaceness or timeness existing in a plurality somewhere. However, spaceness or timeness could be considered as conceptual forms or upadhis. Now, the second condition is that if two supposed universals refer to the same class of individuals, they are not two universals, but only one. Now, what this means is that there could be two definitions of the same class. For example, man and human being refer to the same class. So, we cannot have man-ness and human being-ness as two distinct universals. Okay, now the third condition. It is that if a universal leads to cross-classification, then it is not a real universal. I must add a rider here that with regard to this condition, there is some sort of division amongst the Vaiśeṣikas. Still, I am mentioning the condition as some of the Vaiśeṣikas have considered it. Now, what does this condition imply? See, bipedness is shared both by humans as well as swans. And we know that humans belong to the class of animals, whereas swans belong to the class of birds. In the case, bipedness here becomes a cross-classification, and therefore we cannot treat it as a real universal. Okay, now the fourth condition, and it is that if the mental formation of a universal leads to an infinite regress, then it is not a real universal. The example of it I have already discussed. Remember, cowness-ness, cowness-ness-ness, and so on. So, the fifth condition. The fifth condition is that if a universal is not capable of being positively related to the individuals, then it is not a real universal. Now, this condition is laid basically to exclude the universals of non-being. I will take an example to make you understand what it means. In this room, there is absence of water. In the next room also, there is absence of water. Am I to conclude from this that the absence-ness of water is a real universal? Not at all. It is silly and meaningless to think that the universal absenceness of water exists in different absences of water. Our talk about relations has significance only insofar as the entities are positive. Relations do not exist between negative entities. I can say at this moment there is absence of water in this room. There is absence of flowers in this room. There is absence of cows in this room. There is absence of table in this room. But do I observe any distinguishing characteristic among these absences? Where among these absences does the absenceness of flowers exist? See, the question itself gives the answer. Non-being cannot have a universal. Okay? Now, the sixth and the last condition. It is that if the presence of a universal in the individuals destroys its very nature, then it is not a real universal. The Vaiśeṣikas give this condition to uphold their pluralistic thought. The Vaiśeṣikas also, talk about three kinds of universals, Rather, I should say order of universals. There's an order of universals and it is of three kinds. So, universals are para or the highest. Then there is apara or the lowest kinds of universals, and para apara, which is the middle rank of universals. Being or satta or existence is the highest. There is nothing beyond being. Being is present in all dravyas, gunas and karmas. It is due to the presence of being in them that they are cognized as existence. Cowness or yellowness or throwness are the lowest in order, as they belong only to particular cows and particular objects, whereas dravyatva, which is substanceness, gunatva, which is qualityness, karmatva, which is actionness, they are in the middle, as they belong to all dravyas, all gunas, all karmas. Now, the question that needs to be asked and answered is, how do we know the universals? Are they perceived or inferred? The answer is, universals are perceptible. In fact, it is due to the universals that we recognize, re-identify and classify the particulars. The way the instantiating particular is perceived, the instantiated universal is also perceived. If red is perceived by the organ of sight, redness also is perceived by the organ of sight. Vaiśeṣikas, however, make it clear that although the name of particulars is derived from the name of the universals, one must not assume that the meaning of the universal is the same as the meaning of the particular. Because if one does that, then it could lead one into absurdity. Because in that case, the sentence bring a cow would mean bring cowness. And we all know that there has been a tradition of debate among the different schools of Indian philosophy. So, philosophers from other schools have countered the claims of the Vaiśeṣikas. And I will discuss one such counter made by the Buddhists. Remember, I mentioned in the beginning of the lecture about the different sorts of views held by philosophers with regard to the issue of ontology. Nominalism was the Buddhist view. Then there was conceptualism defended by the Vedantins and the Jainas, and of course the realism of the Vaiśeṣikas. The Vaiśeṣikas uphold realism because postulation of universals helps them to explain several kinds of phenomena. For example, the notion of similarity between things, the facts of recognition, causation, and drawing inferences. Buddhists, however, claim that all these phenomena can be explained with their nominalistic approach. Now, the Buddhists take it is that the function of nouns in a sentence, such as bring a cow, is to exclude from consideration all that which does not answer the description. Meaning, what the term cow designates in this sentence is all the other things which the speaker does not intend to convey. To put it simply, the term cow designates the negation of its complement. So, the sentence bring a cow means bring something which is not a non-cow. The entity suggested by the expression cow in the sentence bring a cow are all things which are not present in that situation. And this is the Buddhist doctrine of apoha. If you're interested, you can read about their apohavad. So basically, the Buddhists' counter is that the task of common nouns can be done without assuming an external entity other than the individual thing in question. A cow can be explained without assuming that reference is being made to cowness. The Vaiśeṣikas argue against the Buddhists, saying that the force of the expression a cow in the sentence bring a cow can only be explained by presuming a property common to cows, which is cowness. As you already know that there is a happy synthesis of Vaiśeṣika metaphysics and Nyaya epistemology. The two schools as a team over a period of time became fuller, richer and more consistent. They have jointly defended their theories against the counterclaims. Udyotakara, a Nyayika, criticizes Buddhist nominalism, saying that if the Buddhist hopes to avoid commitment to universals by adducing apohavad, then he is bound to be thwarted, because in order to understand the directive bring a cow, even granting that the only external reference is to an individual, still we cannot tell which individual the reference is to, except by apprehending the property cows have in common, a property which is the complement of the property all non-cows have in common. The Vaiśeṣikas say that without universals, the world would just consist of numberless, fleeting particulars. It would not be the ordered, distinct totality that it is, and it would become impossible to use language to describe this world. So, universals are just as real as particular things are. One important question emerges from this discussion. If universals are real, where do they exist? Do they exist in the particulars, or they exist independently somewhere else? Many philosophers of the school have tried to answer this question. Prashastapad, for example, says that universal exists in all its loci simultaneously, but the universal does not exist in the space between the loci. Cowness exists in all the cows of the world. Cowness, however, does not exist where cows are not. Some followers of the system say that like ether and selves, universals are also all-pervasive entities. Others say that universals are unlimited in the scope of their occurrence, but they do not occur everywhere. They occur only in their proper instances. The Vaiśeṣika system has confronted even more difficult questions. For example, does a universal exist even when it has no instances? Does unicornness exist despite there being no unicorns? Going by Prashastapada's view, which I mentioned a while ago, according to which a universal exists in all its loci simultaneously but does not exist in the space between the loci, then we have to admit that a universal is non-occurrent when there are no instances. But Udayana, who is a Nayayika, emphatically states that universals do occur even in the absence of instances. Another Nayayika, Apararkadeva, defending Udayana's claim, says that non-occurrence of universals happens between dissolution of the universe and its subsequent creation. And he also says that when universals lack their instances in this universe, then they have instances in another universe. There are many interesting questions and answers, debates, arguments in the treatises of the system. You only have to create interest in these subjects so that you can enjoy the richness, the fullness of your intellect. Anyway, this much about Samanya. Thank you.